Have you ever gone into a level expecting one thing and then had your expectations completely subverted? I just did. Lacertus by Waterpump is a level that's actually pretty different from what I expected. But the more I got into it, the more I found out that this level does a lot of things differently that I've never seen in other platformer levels, and it's really cool. So we're making a video about it, baby. The level is essentially a roguelike, and at first I wasn't really fond of the gameplay loop, but the more I played it, the more I actually really found myself enjoying it. I do usually tend to like roguelike games, but early on this was rough. And there's a big eyeball. Holy crap. Put this in a Nexus thumbnail. Oh! Before the run begins, you're able to choose one of 4 different weapons. A sword, greatsword, polearm, and katana. After that, you spawn in one of 2 different locations with various enemies and obstacles you have to get through. It's not explicitly stated what all of the enemies do, and I think that's actually a fine decision. You will die in this level a lot. Holy crap. Holy crap! But that's really just the nature of how roguelikes work. However, with each death you gain knowledge, both in the level and out. In my opinion, the more important thing is the actual knowledge you get from every run. In the truest form of a roguelike, every run is a complete reset, which for the most part is true for this level. But every time you gain knowledge, it allows you to use the training room to practice fighting those enemies or using those specific weapons. I didn't end up using this in my 3.5 hours of playing, but I think it could probably be useful for most players. In addition to the knowledge, you also gain souls. I think they were called souls. I don't remember. I actually have to check. These souls fill up a little bar, and once the bar fills up all the way, you level up. Every single level up, you gain more stamina, more health, and a bigger soul bar to fill. When your HP bar depletes, however, you don't actually die, you just go down a level. So for example, if you're at level 4 and you die, you'll go down to level 3, and so on and so forth. Let's talk about the weapons real quick. These also drop from enemies, pots, and bosses, and are basically essential to beating the level. I don't know the exact odds of weapon drops, but you better keep killing enemies until you get one, because it starts to get real. There are 4 different tiers of weapons for the 4 different types I mentioned earlier. The tiers are common, rare, epic, and legendary, corresponding with the Fortnite colors. Weapons also have a secondary ability, which depends on the type of weapon it is. Swords have quick strike, greatswords have guarding, poleheads have whirlwinds, and katanas deflect. Anyway, shortly after killing some enemies, parkouring through the level, and collecting some weapons, you will likely encounter a boss. For my runs, it was always this eyeball as the first boss, so I'm just going to assume that's always the case. You will probably get whooped by the eyeball first attempt, and possibly a few other times after that. Holy crap, I got movement like... He's coming out of the cave! But eventually you will prevail, and the boss will drop a pretty strong weapon, a lot of souls, and a poem, which lets you upgrade one of your weapon's abilities for that run. After that, you're free to leave the dungeon and can explore the rest of the world. There are 2 other dungeon locations, and like the spawn location, they are also randomized to be one of 2 different dungeon types. Just like the first dungeon, you kill enemies, break pots, and gather loot until eventually you kill that dungeon's boss. Now, there is one very, very major key detail that I've left out. After 10 minutes, death approaches, and the fog comes to consume you. It starts from the bottom of the world and makes its way up to the top. If you don't climb all the way up to the top, you will likely die in the fog. I may have done this 1 or 2 times. Dying. But whether or not you climb to the top or die in the fog, you will end every single run at the top of the map. And at the top, you have to face the lizard. Why am I fighting this lizard that has 1,000,000 HP? What's happening? What is this level? The lizard, or the soul eater, is the final boss in what you've been spending all this time gathering weapons and souls to fight. Each time the lizard kills you, it knocks you down a level until eventually... But if you successfully kill the lizard, you beat the level. That's what I thought. Phase that just absolutely kills me. Oh, I killed the lizard! Is that it? Did I win? I actually don't know if I won. Okay, he's on his feet. Oh, frick. Why? So after you kill the lizard, he has a second phase, which is, you know, just a little bit harder. He's emoting on me. Look at him down there. He also fully transforms into Lacertus, which... Oh yeah, that's the thing. After defeating him in the second phase, however, you free him from his curse and are able to complete the level. Or at least, that's what I think. I wasn't actually able to successfully do it. This level is hard. The overall designs in this level are really, really good. The actual dungeons themselves just look so nice. Whether it's this cool lava that flows down or this spike thing that swings back and forth, it's all just super clean. And they all have this sort of foreground effect on all the blocks, and even though it's just a black silhouette, it really adds a lot. It's nice to see a level of this scale depart from the traditional pixel style, which, although I do love, it's nice to see a different style. The boss designs are also really great looking. I'm really a fan of the eyeball. I think it's got some super cool animations, but the final boss, Lacertus, we'll get to that. It's cool. The death animation is also super sick. If you fall into a pit or run into spikes, your cube does this little breaking thing, and then it pieces itself back together, which just looks super cool. And if you lose all your health, you die, and then the camera pans back to your most recent checkpoint. It kind of looks like in GTA when you switch characters and the camera just like pans to the other guy. I don't know, I thought it looks cool. Let's talk about the dungeon designs. Each one has its own unique theming and little gimmicks that separate it from the others. For the starting location, we have the catacombs and the poison cave. Starting with the catacombs, it's pretty basic, but also pretty fitting for a starting area. There's only one gimmick in this dungeon, and it's these spikes that come up out of the floor and ceilings. I really like how they're used in this section, because at first I was super confused. Like, I really thought this was just impossible to get through, and then I realized you can just go under them. This dungeon has an exit in the top left and a boss room on the right, and the first boss will always be the eyeball. The second possible spawn location is the poison cave. It has some pretty nice theming with this brown mud and these almost dark maroon looking bricks that combine really nice with the bright pink flowers. This, I would say, is quite a bit more difficult to traverse than the catacombs because there are a lot of spikes on the walls, floors, ceilings, and in some of the areas it forces you to do some pretty difficult jumps to get to the boss or to the exit. This dungeon also has a little signature gimmick in these poison flowers, and if you stand near them for too long, they'll start to spit out poison. Venturing to the far right of the map, you will encounter one of two smaller dungeons, one of these being the clock tower. The clock tower has one of my favorite designs. It's based off a clock tower. But at the top, there's this really nice looking clock. Again, because it's a clock tower. But the central gimmick of this one incorporates really well with the gameplay. In the center of the tower, there's a giant chain that slowly moves upward, and you have to use it to climb the tower. There's a lot of sections where you either have to time your dash to go through the chain or use it to wall jump up and gain height. I think despite this being a smaller dungeon, it has some really fun ways it uses this gimmick. And of course, at the top of this dungeon, there's also a boss. It can be one of two different bosses, but we'll talk about those a little bit later. The second small dungeon to the right is the grave site. Design-wise, it's a bit similar to the catacombs, but way more spooky. The background here is especially really nice as these windows and lanterns really give it that ghostly sort of feeling. The gimmick in this dungeon is platforms that rise up when you stand on them. This is a pretty common trope in a lot of platformers, and of course, the level uses it in a way that kills you. At the top of this dungeon, there's also another boss room. Deep in the center of the map, you can find one of two large dungeons. The first of these is called Dungeon. Yes, that's the name. I checked the editor, it's Dungeon, so that's what it's called. This dungeon is very much dungeon themed. I have no idea how many times I'm going to say dungeon in this. It's going to be quite a few. With its traditional dungeon theming, there are a lot of spikes. Quite a few, in fact. This dungeon also has two gimmicks unique to it. One of these gimmicks are platforms that open up after some time standing on them, and the second gimmick are these swinging maces, which, holy cow, can they combo you. Oh my gosh! What? Personally, I would say this is probably the hardest dungeon to get through. And of course, at the end of this dungeon, there is a boss room. The boss you find in this dungeon will be randomized between two options, but will always be different from the dungeon to the right. The second center dungeon and the final of the 6 main dungeons is the Forge. The Forge is, in my opinion, the best looking dungeon. The lava that pours down, the lava on the ground, the pipes, the gray bricks, the steam, it is a full-on lava temple and it looks so cool. Gameplay-wise, I think it also plays really well. There are also 2 main gimmicks in this dungeon as well, and I think they're very fitting with the theme. The first is lava that pours down from these grates, and man, I've said it before, but the lava looks so good. These essentially act as spikes in the sense that when you touch them, you break apart and respawn at your most recent safe location. The second gimmick are these platforms which float on lava geysers and slowly go down when you're standing on them. Pretty standard stuff, but it fits pretty well with the dungeon. One more final thing to touch on is the final boss arena. There's not a whole lot going on visually, but I actually think that's fine because you're going to be focused on the boss most of the time. But there are a lot of cool things that happen in the background during the fight. There are 4 bosses in this level, and each one has their own unique attacks and patterns. The Seer Spirit, or the Eyeball, as mentioned earlier, resides in the first dungeon. It has 3 different attacks, and each one changes its appearance. The base form shoots out poison darts, the sideways looking one slams into the ground, and the blue eye spins around with lasers that can be avoided by dashing through. The next 2 bosses can be found in either the right dungeon or the center. The first of these two is the Sleeping Spirit. The Sleeping Spirit attacks by, I guess, telepathically controlling a sword. I'm not 100% sure the anatomy of how this works, but he controls a sword. It has several different attacks, including spikes that can pop out of the ground and several different sword swings. There's also this like instant death laser thing that comes out of the ground. I'm not 100% sure, but don't get hit by it because you'll die. This guy just freaking killed me. The other boss you can encounter in these dungeons is the Slug Spirit. The Slug is pretty similar to traditional worm bosses that you may have seen in other games or platformer levels, and in my opinion is definitely the easiest of the three to fight. Before we get into the final boss, there is one issue that I have with the bosses, and that's that they are very easy to cheese. Although a bit time consuming, it is a completely valid strategy to just hit the boss twice and leave the arena. Because there's nothing preventing you from leaving the arena, the boss will de-aggro and just stop attacking you. It makes sense why you'd be able to leave, because maybe you start fighting the boss and you realize, oh, I'm not going to be able to kill this thing, so you just dip out of the arena, but it definitely leads to a few moments where you can cheese it. With that said, it's not a huge issue, as it does waste a lot of time, and it's probably not the most viable strategy in a 10-minute time crunch, but I do think it should probably be changed. But again, it's not a huge deal. The final and technically only required boss is the Spirit Eater / Lacertus. The final phase is the Spirit Eater form, which, once learned, becomes pretty consistent to fight. About halfway through the first phase, he will start to burrow and then call down meteors to slam into you. This does throw off your rhythm a little bit when fighting him, but it's relatively easy to deal with. The second phase, however, is on another level, in multiple ways. The animations are some of the coolest things I have ever seen. I mean, look at him jump in the air. That animation is way too cool to be in this game. But also, this lizard, he can fight. The lizard can fight. The final phase is very difficult and will require a lot of combat knowledge and a lot of gearing up. The combat is a really big part of this level. I mean, you can't beat the level without at least beating the final boss, which requires combat. Overall, I think the combat system's really well done. It's one of the best I've seen in Geometry Dash because it makes really good use of the limited control scheme. The level uses player 1 controls as the basic movements and player 2 controls for special actions like attacking, dashing, using weapon abilities, and healing. As you may have noticed, there are 4 different actions the 2 player buttons control, but only 3 buttons. That's because the player 2 button actually serves 2 functions. The first is a dash, which is simply activated by pressing the button, and the second is healing, which is activated by holding the button. I think this approach works really well, actually. I thought there would be more issues with me accidentally healing when I'm trying to dash or vice versa, but it really didn't happen. What a save. The combat is also really impressive with its movement. You only really have 2 extra movement options in wall jumping and dashing, but just those 2 allow for a lot of really neat mobility that feels great. The weapon variety in this level is also really good. There are only 4 classes, but every rarity of those weapons in those classes feels pretty unique with its abilities. I found myself using the Red River a lot as it just felt like the most viable weapon for me, but you can pretty much use whatever you want. Except for the chunk. Do not use the chunk. The chunk is the worst thing I've ever picked up in my life. Holy crap, this takes 5.5 years to swing. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to kill this boss. Now, I have to admit something to you. Originally, I was very critical of the combat system because of how much damage I was doing, or lack of damage that I was doing. But after actually learning how it works, I think it's actually a pretty neat system. At first, I was really confused why all my attacks felt like I was using a toothpick, but then I learned how the damage scaling actually works. Unlike most games, you don't strictly get stronger as you level up, and you don't just do more damage by having a higher tier weapon. You actually need both. Every tier of weapon has a level range where it's most effective. Unfortunately, if it's outside that range, it's basically a wet noodle. This is a pretty unique way of doing damage scaling that I haven't really seen before, as it basically forces you to use every tier of weapon. I do, however, have a few minor problems with this. Finding a rare weapon early on is really exciting, until you learn it's basically useless at your level. This would normally be fine, as you can just use higher tier weapons until you gain enough levels to be effective with it, but again, it hits like a noodle. This does, however, make for some really great risk-reward scenarios, as you have to evaluate if sacrificing damage in the early phase, causing you to gain levels slower, is worth it for the high damage you could do later on. And especially since it's not guaranteed you'll find the weapon you want again later on, you have to weigh the option on if it's worth it to carry this around. Another thing to consider is the final fight. When fighting Lacertus, getting hit too many times will cause you to lose a level, and if you're right at the edge of a weapon's effective level range, getting hit just a few times will push you out of that range and basically make you hit for low damage the rest of the fight. I think the weapon effectiveness mechanic works great in the grinding phase, but it can lead to some unfair feeling boss attempts. I think in general, the combat system and weapon effectiveness is really great once you know what you're doing, but it can be a bit of a learning curve to figure out how everything works. Overall though, I think this is a fantastic level. The designs are some of the best I've seen in pixel and non-pixel platformers, and the gameplay loop is honestly really addicting when you get into it. The concept of having 10 minutes to gear up against the final fight is really cool, and I haven't seen something like this done in many other platformer levels. The weapons, enemies, bosses, and dungeon designs are also exceptional. With the exception of a few minor things in the combat system and some boss cheese, there really isn't anything holding this level back. This is a level that I think a lot of people will play and draw inspiration from in the future for their levels, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is something we see in the GD Awards this year. With all that said, I'm definitely comfortable sending this one for a Mythic rating. Star rate. But what did you think? Did you hate that I didn't mention more about the slug? Let me know in the comments. I try to read all the comments, so I'd love to know what you think about the level. I think over here there might be a YouTube video, or maybe on that side, I don't know. There's a YouTube video up there, I think, so you should watch that. You can also like and subscribe. That would be really cool, and I'd be eternally grateful. You could not do that though, but I would like you less.